I recently finished The Hobbit, and it is just so mind-blowingly good. And you reread these stories, the ones that from your childhood and the ones that are supposedly the greatest of all time, or the heralded as this, that, and the other. And when you finally sit down and read it, there's this amazing feeling when you read it and you really understand why everyone loves it. It's just, it matches up to the expectations, to the hype. It fully delivers on what's promised to it. And in particular, what I wanted to talk about today is the main character of Bilbo. And there's this aspect that comes into play in a story where if a character or if a theme is so well designed, it's really hard to imagine it done any other way. Bilbo is the perfect everyman hero. He has the smallest expectations for himself and goes along with this adventure with the dwarves. And he's completely overshadowed and he's on for the ride. But then he has these moments where he kind of rises up to the challenge. He's able to be heroic. He's able to, thrive on this adventure. He surprises himself. His tookish side comes out, and he has a way to show and prove to the audience that there's more to him than meets the eye. And his entire character is done so well that it's really hard to imagine Bilbo as anything else. And let's imagine if Bilbo were different. Start back at the beginning of the story with a blank slate. And when you write a story, you'll often begin with a question of what happens. This is the A's and the B's, A to B. You'll block out the geography, travel, enemies. Our main character is this guy. He's a little fellow who lives in a hole in the ground. He goes on an adventure, kills a dragon. A to B. There you go. It gives a good structure to follow and helps begin to understand, what needs to happen. There's this kind of the bones, the meat and potatoes, the non-glamorous aspects of the story. These are the rules and the internal logic where, okay, if you're going to come and you're going to travel this long distance, you need to have food. Okay, what happens if they lose the food? You have to have resupply. You have to have characters who are going to resupply them. You have to have their motivations for why they're going to help out these characters. And what you have as you do is you have this whole network of wills, this network of individuals that are at play in this world. And this is what really begins to bring your story to life. This is where it fleshes out the world, from here. This is the nuts and bolts of storytelling, and this is what it is. And so once you have this basic structure, the next question is characters. What do you do with these characters? Because again, what I talked about previously, A to Z, that doesn't really tell you anything about the characters. We could have something a bit akin to a bit more like the Aragorn type character who's tall and handsome and, action man. He's incredibly competent and powerful. He can do all this sorts of stuff. You could have a coward character who's, the more comedic role like Scooby and Shaggy and everything from there. They have these characters where they are cowards. They are everyone's favorite characters, but you have to balance it in other ways. You could have the coward character. You could have the more competent character. You could have the guy who's just kind of bumbling along, I was watching clips of Silicon Valley, Big Head, where he just kind of fails his way to the top and has no idea really what's going on. And, they have that after scene where he finally realizes why everybody calls him Big Head. And so these are all the options you could imagine for Bilbo. He could be very capable. He could be an experienced adventurer hiding out from, trying to leave behind his life as a hitman for a bunch of marauding sea hobbits or something like that. And he's pulled into one last job. You get the idea. You got a bunch of different things you could play with from here. And so the reason why the character of Bilbo matters so much is because he's the lens through which we will view the world of Middle-earth, Thorin Oakenshield and his crew, Smaug, the whole adventure, Everything comes into play here because characters are often like billiard balls. One character in that interacts with another character and that interacts with another one, and that essentially makes the heart of the story. The heart of The Hobbit is not they went to the Lonely Mountain and back. There's so much more to the story. There's the ring, there's Bilbo, coming, the adventure, the goal, the thrill, the fear, Bjorn, Gollum, all of this comes into play. And what it is we see how all of this comes through Bilbo's point of view. And this is what guides the story, everything from there. This really kind of is our introduction. This is our guide into the story. And so the character of Bilbo matters. What he thinks matters. What he feels matters from here. This is the amazing part about stories is because you can have things that happen to characters which would never happen to you yourself in your real life. And you get to experience what it's like to be a doctor. The high pressure situations when you've got a patient under the knife and you're trying to figure out, you're trying not to screw up. You're trying to defuse a bomb. You're trying to go on an adventure to kill a dragon. You have all these things, to fall in love with a character like this, to fall in love with a princess, a prince, to be seduced. All of these things with stories. This is the reason why we like it. And it's guided from this point of view. It's not controlled, but it is heavily influenced and guided. And so what it means is when we meet the dwarves, when we meet Bilbo, we're looking at it from Bilbo's point of view. This is where it really comes into play. And so think of this interacting with the other characters. How we see Bilbo changes how we see the dwarf. And so if you had a Bilbo that was much more like an Aragorn-like character, somebody who's incredibly handsome, incredibly competent, how would you think of the dwarves, when you're going on? When you have a character who knows exactly how to adventure, he's tall, he's got everything going for him and everything like that. He knows exactly what to do, and the dwarves are complaining and whining, and they're bumbling, and they screw up, and they leave behind companions, and they're mad, they're angry, they're complaining at Bilbo for rescuing them again. Why couldn't he have done a better job? Like, all this awful stuff, even after he's rescued them from the spiders, and they've already promised that their entire family and for generations are indebted to him. Imagine if it was a different type of character. Bilbo was a different type of character. You really start to hate the dwarves. They would get really, really annoying and on your nerves, and that would break the story, because the story isn't, you're not supposed to hate the dwarves. You're supposed to understand that they're rough around the edges. They're pretty flawed. They're kind of regular people. I was going to say regular people. They're regular dwarves, It's realistic that they would feel this way, even if it's not right. It's totally not right from there. Because the dwarves aren't all bad, and you need to remember that. And it really hurts when you have one character that's just amazing at everything, and then to have another group of characters who are just really bad at everything. It makes that difference between them really starts to drive a wedge between them. Because, again, the dwarves have their good moments. They're getting ready to go into the Misty Mountains at Gandalf's insistence, back into that darkness, assuredly to probably die, or a bunch of them to die, just to try and rescue Bilbo. When Bilbo's caught by the trolls, they go after them. They're kind of grumbling because, hey, our burglar's not very good at burgling, it turns out. And they're right. Surprise, surprise. Gandalf maybe didn't tell them everything that was going on. From there. And this is where, it captures the heart of the story. This is what it is. You're not supposed to have this group of super heroic adventurers that just know exactly what they're doing. It's kind of like an Everyman's Hero. They're all regular guys, more or less, from here. They're regular hobbit, regular dwarves. They're not amazing. There's the drudgery of the travel. It's much more realistic and keeps the story grounded. From there, it's not like this grand, we have the greatest, the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship, you have the greatest heroes from all the lands, seemingly. You have Legolas, son of Thranduil. You have Gimli, son of Gloin. You have all these characters who are supposedly, representing their race, their people, their country from here. In this story, this is not it. The dwarves are definitely not exactly the cream of the crop. Like, they got a lot of flaws in them. And you can see, it's just, Tolkien's going for a different story. And it's this tempered view of the dwarves, more realistic view, where you can have a character with very low heroism at the start. He's largely a coward, and he goes through these moments where he rescues the dwarves from the spiders and the dungeons of the Elf King. He does all this, and it feels realistic. It feels all within character. It's a moment of triumph. Aragorn doing this is just a regular Tuesday, because you have high expectations for him, so it makes sense when he does these high, amazing things. Bilbo, we have lower expectations, because he's kind of an everyman. He didn't really ask for this. He's kind of just pushed along and kind of go from there. And what it does is it's perfectly realistic. It's within character. And more so, this allows us to have these kind of lower, flawed, realistic version of Thorin and the dwarves, to the point where when he tries to hoard all the treasure for himself, it's kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, kind of, you see where it came from. It's not exactly that surprisingly, And so what you have is you have these two characters that are pretty flawed, very realistic, and then you're going to have another random character, aka Bard, kill Smaug. And it doesn't usurp the characters in any way. We haven't built up Thorin to be this grand hero that's going to avenge his grandfather, anything like that. Same for Bilbo. Bilbo's not running up there and stabby the, Smoggy in the weak point or anything like that. It's not like, season 8 Game of Thrones, where Arya just teleports out of nowhere and just completely destroys Jon Snow's entire storyline and point of existence from there. He doesn't want it, and we don't want him there, and he should have just exited the show at that point, And this is what it is. This is what Tolkien does. He has to set up these moments so you can have these moments way down there at the end of the story where that pays off. It also means when Thorin's death, it's not a tragedy. When you think of The Hobbit, it's not this depressing, dark tragedy. It's not like the Children of Húrin. It's not like any of the other things where you have these characters where you have these high hopes and they come crashing down because they're so flawed or anything like that. If Gimli died in The Lord of the Rings, in The Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, Return of the King, any of the books, it'd be heartbreaking. Like, he's an amazing character. He's so good. He's running all the way across Rohan just to rescue the hobbits. They're going after him. He's stalwart. He's happy. He's there. He's willing to transcend, maybe a millennia of racism, racial tension between him and the elves to be a friend of the elves. Even Galadriel recognizes how special of a character he is.
43.
He was already dead.
He was twitching.
He was twitching because he's got my axe embedded in his nervous system.
And if he died, it would be really depressing. It's really, really tragic from here. Thorin dying, one of the main characters of the story, normally it would make it would overshadow The Hobbit as a very depressing story, but it's not. It's because we kind of detached from him as a character because, he has his flaws. He severed that bond with Bilbo to the point where when he dies, or he's dying and he's certainly about to die, you're like, yeah, it kind of makes sense. But it means that the story, you can have this realistic aspect of sacrifice and death. When I say realistic, it's something from the real world that we recognize. Because again, this world is of dragons, of magic, of goblins. This is not supposed, seemingly not a realistic world. So what you do, you input things that people, the readers, would understand and connect with. Sacrifice, death, bravery, heroism. You have all these moments, and these grounded things help keep and enmesh the story and make sure we understand how the stakes feel real from here. And so, again, all of this, our feelings about Thorin and everything like that, whose point of view is it from? It's from Bilbo's. This is the character where Bilbo is like, listen, I trusted you and you failed me. You could really have a different thing where Bilbo really hates Thorin from here for how he treated him or anything like that. But it's because Bilbo's character, he's really kind-hearted. He's a sweet guy. He does all of this not because he wants to be adventurous, but because he doesn't want his friends to die. This is a different motivation coming out from here. And that's part of the magic of The Hobbit, is because this story, it feels like an everyman story, where a random guy, someone who could be me, this is what isekais do. They take a random guy and just suck him into a fantasy world or anything like that. And he's swept up in this wonderful adventure. And this is what, it's a mix between a fairy tale. This is what fairy tales did so good and why I think they were so popular, is because they're like random poor guy without a princess, a pot of gold, and no glory. And everyone is sitting there going, that's me. That's me. And then you got to go through the fairy tale and where he fixes that. He gets the pot of gold. He gets the princess, he gets the glory, and everyone's like, I want that. And so, you have this story and everyone's, latches onto it and they're sucked into it. And this is what Bilbo does, becomes rich. He's famous. He's a hero. And this is what helps, is keeping it grounded so where it feels real, because when the danger feels real, the success feels real. So when Bilbo returns home triumphant, it feels real and it's satisfying. This is great moment when Bilbo finally returns home with all of this, having gone through this adventure. And we're like, you know what, Bilbo? You don't need to go on another adventure again. You've done enough. You have this gold. We've lived this life. We had this grand adventure, and now we can go back to our normal life, forever changed, but forever grateful in a new light and a new way of what we have here at home. So, but yeah, I just want to go over those thoughts. I love Tolkien. You can't get enough of him from there. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Please like and or subscribe, anything like that. I really hate to ask that, but it's one of those things where it does actually matter a lot in terms of the algorithm from there. You kind of live or die from there. So if you guys don't mind, please take the time to do so. I'd really appreciate it. Let me know what you guys think, and post how you feel about the dwarves. Am I too harsh on Thorin or anything like that? Am I gotten it wrong? Let me know, and we'll go. And I'll see you guys in the next one.